Good morning. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Hopefully you can hear me. So my name is Martha Campbell, and I'm with Rocky Mountain Institute, and I will be presenting this morning. We're very excited to have you joining us. Again, if for any reason you're having trouble hearing or having any sort of technical difficulties, please feel free to send us a chat and we will try and resolve the issue on our side. The plan for this morning is I will go through the presentation and then we will take questions at the end of our discussion. So as I mentioned, I'm Martha Campbell with Rocky Mountain Institute, and we are excited to speak to you today about a new approach to doing major rehab projects on multifamily housing, specifically using a more industrial and standardized approach to doing net zero energy retrofits. So what we'll be going over today first is what is Realize. So this is a webinar hosted by Realize. And then after that, we'll talk a little bit about how building owners can benefit from this effort. And then we will let you know about a pilot that we are kicking off and a request for proposals that we are opening today and inviting you to submit your potential buildings to. And then lastly, we'll close with the question and answer session. So what is Realize? So we're going to first frame this with the problem. So many of you might be kind of familiar with what a renovation can look like. Maybe this looks pretty familiar to you, a major kind of gut rehab type project. You know, everything is, okay, well, hold on one second, folks. We seem to be having some technical difficulties with the actual presentation. One second. Is that what it is? Okay, hold on one second. Oops. Okay, that's not what I need to show. Great. Okay. Apologies for that. So as I was mentioning, you know, a modern day renovation can look a lot like this, especially in a multifamily masonry building, you know, in a dense area. Sometimes it requires, you know, serious cutting of the walls and floors, maybe dealing with leakage issues, the wiring's old, and every single project basically is a unique snowflake. And requires just a ton of exterior infrastructure to try and bring this building up to a more current and operable state. And what that means is that every single project is unique and requires kind of its own set of brain damage in order to figure out a solution that's appropriate for that building. And, you know, I like to use the analogy of getting a cell phone. So we've all seen, you know, just the phenomenal adoption that occurred when cell phones first entered into the market. And just imagine if you walked into a Verizon store and you pulled up to the counter and they said, you know, you need to pick out all the hardware that goes into your cell phone. You need to select the towers that you'd like to route your service through. And please also pick the frequency of the signal that you'll be using when you're routing that service through those towers. And I can guarantee you that the rate of adoption that we've seen in you know, personal computing devices would not be what it is today if we continue to ask people to bundle their own services in this way and even get financing for those, $1,000 smartphones. So basically what's happened is a group of industry leaders, I would say, in the Netherlands have said, we need to better integrate retrofit offerings and even just the delivery of buildings in general, right? And I think many of you have probably seen the report that came out from McKinsey about how the construction industry is one of the kind of laggards in terms of technological innovation and integration in its supply chain. And so that's basically what the folks in the Netherlands are trying to address, is how do we make this something that's streamlined and much easier for people to adopt. So I'm going to share a video with you to give you a sense of what that could look like. So I know a few of you have already seen that video a few times, but for those that haven't, I thought it was a really powerful tool to give you a sense of kind of the technical solution and what that could look like. But one of the things that Energy Sprong has done that we believe is really transformative is they have created an offering in the market that we have many of these components to that offering here in the United States, but not all in one kind of full package. And so the things that they're combining are an insurance of quality through a performance guarantee and some form of an energy plan that tenants have. The second thing is that the retrofit is much less intrusive. The video you just saw was a retrofit that was done in a day. On average, their retrofits take about 10 days and require minimal tenant disruption or displacement. The third thing is that these packages need to be affordable. They're often incorporated into existing plans for some sort of major capital improvement, and the energy savings help finance that incremental cost of going deeper into improving the performance of the building. And then lastly, as you saw in the video, you can tell that something's happened to the building, and it's attractive, and it's an enhancement to the quality of the building stock. And so in order for them to do this, it's requiring completely reorganizing the market in some ways. And Energy Sprong has acted as this market facilitator. And they've done a few things. And one of the most significant in our eyes is they have aggregated large volumes of demand from affordable housing owners in the Netherlands. And they have presented that to manufacturers and suppliers and asked them to create a much more integrated and standardized approach for doing these retrofits. And their very first contract was 11,000 units of hard commitments for retrofits. And then the idea was that the suppliers would be able to charge a certain price along a cost curve to help kind of cover some of those initial costs for those prototypes in the beginning of this process. And then over time, as the suppliers and the value chain became more organized, the cost would go down as those volumes went up. The other thing that they've done is they've, as I mentioned, kind of created a unique structure for how to handle the quality piece and the performance piece of these retrofits. So they've basically divided risk into two pieces. There's performance risk of the actual mechanical systems and the installations that are being done to the building. But then there's a behavioral risk component. And they have separated those so that the risk appropriately lies with the correct party. So the performance guarantee is sitting with the contractors and the manufacturers for the equipment and the installation. And then the performance risk is sitting with the building owner and the tenants. And the tenants have been entered into this kind of energy service plan that gives them a budget of a certain temperature that is constantly maintained in their home throughout the year, a certain amount of hot water, and a kilowatt hour budget for plug loads. And the tenants, just like in a cell phone plan, can purchase a certain amount in that budget, and then if they surpass that budget, then they're welcome to pay the additional utility costs. But it gives them a much easier way to manage their cash flows on utility expenses, and also solves the split incentive issue. And then thirdly, creates a set of underwritable cash flows that are able to be financed. And so that is where Energy Sprong is kind of stepping in on the financing side of this diagram. Lastly, there are certain code restrictions that allow for what you can do to a building and can't do to a building. And so Energy Sprong has worked closely with different local municipalities to either create variances or help communities kind of change their code to enable this kind of more exterior heavy form of retrofitting where it's necessary. So what is Realize? Well, Realize has been inspired by this approach, and what we are focused on is adapting that to the US market. And we're very focused on looking at the aspects of this model that can be transferred across markets in the United States. And there are some things that are definitely going to be much more regionally organized, and then there are things that are transferable, like the energy plan contracts and the performance contracts. Even the high-level financing structure can be transferable. And so, this really takes a community of partners. And we just wanted to give a big thank you to everyone who thus far is involved with this effort, who we've been talking to and has supported us in doing this. We have a variety of different initiatives, even within Realize, that we're working on. We have a Department of Energy award that I'm going to tell you about here in a minute. We just recently were awarded a California Energy Commission grant to create an Energy Sprung-like program in California. And we've been working also with Retrofit New York and are on one of their design and engineering teams. So big thanks to everyone. But how does this, how do you all fit in, and how do building owners benefit from this? And so there's kind of three main categories of benefits that we see to building owners. So the first is on the project economic side. The next one is just better local integration with utility and city and state programs. And then the technical solution. So on the project economic side, there are a variety of benefits, and some of them are already accessible, and then some of them will be part of the more long-term vision that we're establishing for this effort. So, as we all know, there's the energy savings, but there are certain, states that are starting to really recognize going to zero in their low-income housing tax credit scoring metrics, and so this can improve the competitiveness of a project. Depending on how you're able to modify your utility allowance. In California, they have a utility allowance calculator where you can actually make modifications to the utility allowance and turn that into rent through reduced utility costs for tenants. You have improved debt capacity. With a much more kind of prefabricated structure that you're putting in place, you can see reduced labor costs, which also helps in markets where there are labor constraints and there's a shortage of supply in, like very hot markets like the San Francisco Bay Area and New York. This seems to be a common theme right now in the market. And then lastly, this access to capital piece, something that we're really hoping to do through our California Energy Commission award, is to really think through the financing process and the capital stack and come up with a much more streamlined way that projects can quickly qualify for doing this kind of program. On the local integration side, as I mentioned, there's the utility incentive dollars, and then there's different states and city municipalities have their climate action goals and are developing local programs to support the realization of those goals. And so this effort is very much focused on trying to integrate with those activities and make sure that it ensures that these projects can be much more streamlined and go off with faster permitting processes, variances for any of those kind of code restrictions that we were talking about, et cetera. And then on the technical solution side, one of the things that we see as a big piece of promise in this approach is that you really reduce some of your construction risk through having things kind of pre-designed and prefabricated in a factory where you can really mitigate a lot of installation risk, especially around things like windows and doors that can not necessarily be done correctly in the field. So we'll also talk about, the benefits to tenants and to building owners, but, you have this potential for a clean new facade, new windows and doors, improved noise control for the tenants, improved indoor air quality, just a more stable temperature and therefore better occupant comfort. For a building owner, there's just the potential for a much more standardized mechanical system servicing, and you can have some reduced maintenance costs there. You have happier tenants, better building durability. Obviously, the one that we've all been focusing on for years, reduced energy costs, but for tenants, that can really mean a much more stable cost of living. And then for you all, increased building asset value. And so the idea, again, is to just add this efficiency component that's targeting net zero energy or net zero energy ready to the incremental cost of a planned capital improvement. So I'm going to get into the weeds here just a little bit, but try not to go too much into the weeds. But what we've done to kind of think through what does this need to look like for a building owner to be something that's actionable. And we tried to kind of think, you know, as if we were a building owner and look at an income statement and understand the implications of kind of a business as usual stream of cash flows and what kind of debt servicing you could do based on those cash flows versus when you incorporate something like a realized retrofit program, how much increased debt capacity does that create for you? So on the left-hand side of this page, you'll see kind of your business as usual income statement with your utility allowance, on your income side, your gross rent, and then you'll see kind of your usual expenses of your electricity, gas, water, and sewer, some maintenance costs, maintenance supplies, and then, you know, you can see there that you've got, you know, over a 15-year period, roughly $3 million of debt capacity. When you go through the realized kind of retrofit process, you're able to capture some savings over here, as well as some increased rents potentially if you are able to make modifications to your utility allowance. If you are not able to make modifications to your utility allowance, that's where that energy plan can come in. And that's something that we very much are focused on looking at and how it needs to be structured to address this issue where you can't really change the utility allowance. So anyhow, on the far right, you'll see kind of the variance. And what that variance allows is over a 15-year period, roughly an additional $700,000 of project funding just by kind of changing your gross rent, reducing your utility expenses, and your maintenance costs. So in theory, that $700,000 should afford this incremental cost for these kinds of improvements. So on this next slide, what we're showing is kind of where that break-even threshold is, right? So you have $700,000 additional debt capacity that could, in theory, be put into taking this building to a higher level of performance and ideally net zero energy. So this dark green arrow is showing that $700,000 threshold. Now we have kind of three major categories that are being represented with these bars. On the far right-hand side, you have a business as usual capital improvement project maybe that you were doing. It might not even be that intense. And the tops of the bars that are in green represent the net present value of your utility costs. And that's both for electricity and for water and sewer. The dark green is for your energy component of your utility costs. The light green is for your water and sewer. Now the other sets of bars there's two bars for the other two scenarios. There was only one for BAU, is showing you kind of two potential retrofit solutions. And the bars that are on the left with the non-green colored components to the bar chart are showing you the capital costs of the retrofit components. So on the far left, we've got a retrofit with rooftop solar. And you can see without incentives, this is way above $700,000. And this is, apologies, this is a feasibility study that we did for the San Francisco Bay Area market. So on the left-hand side, without incentives, this is way above the $700,000 threshold. When you add in incentives that are available, you're almost in the money with this first retrofit solution. In the middle was another alternative, which was a net zero energy retrofit with off-site renewables. And so just the capital costs alone, with incentives, you're actually now getting below that $700,000 threshold. And this, in theory, is in the money. Now, one thing to just note: why are the bars so different in terms of utility costs? On the left-hand side, with the rooftop solar option in that market, the cost for electricity was much lower than if you had to do the off-site kind of community solar option. So in theory, even though the capital cost with incentives is a little bit higher in that first scenario on the left-hand side with the rooftop solar, over the long run, when you look at the present value of your utility costs, it's actually the ideal solution. So that's how we're thinking about how we need to set what the minimum viable option is for the cost of these retrofits. They have to be below that that additional debt capacity that they can create in the utility savings that we showed in the last slide. Okay, so what we're doing though at the moment is there are a number of things going on. So one of them is that we have a Department of Energy award that we're doing a pilot for. And the focus of this pilot is to really test an integrated zero energy ready retrofit solution for a multifamily home or multifamily building. And we are focusing on the Northeast and the Midwest for this pilot. The desired outcome is to develop this kind of standardized, transferable, climate zone specific, net zero energy ready retrofit system that witnesses at least a 50% lower energy use intensity relative to the measured baseline of the energy performance of the building. And as previously mentioned, it needs to be transferable. And so what we've done is a building typology study to look at the building stock in those climate zones and select a building type where this one pilot would be relevant to many other buildings. And so on that note, while this project is focused on one specific building, we very much are using this as an opportunity to engage building owners across the country, because as I mentioned, this demand aggregation piece of unlocking the market is critical. And so we very much want to start to organize building owners and their building stock in a way that we can present to suppliers in order to start really seeing some action on the R&D side of the technical solution and to help bring those retrofit costs down dramatically. In the Netherlands, I forgot to mention, but they've seen the cost of those retrofit packages go down 50% since they first started their program. So in terms of our pilot, this is a little kind of schedule we've been using internally to track major tasks on the project. But the highlights here are that we want to have our pilot selected no later than the end of this year. And then the idea is that we work very closely with the building owner to develop a set of designs for the retrofit solution. And, you know, there is the opportunity along the way, obviously, to influence those designs, and kind of the final, you know, moment of truth will happen no later than the end of the second quarter of 2019 on if the building owner decides to follow through with implementing these designs. And then lastly, the completion of the construction of the pilot needs to occur no later than by the end of the second quarter of 2020, with to allow for a year of monitoring after completion. So as I mentioned, we are opening up a building application process to select our pilot building. And here are the main requirements that we have for that pilot building. So it needs to be 3 to 5 stories, a standalone building with at least 30 units. It needs to be load-bearing exterior, to have a load-bearing exterior brick wall. It needs to have sufficient clearance around the perimeter to allow for expansion of the envelope by up to 12 inches, plus 5 inches for installation. It needs to be a simple building with no ornate architectural features or balconies. A few are possible, but really a nice simple building. We need to have basement access when that's applicable, and ideally to be a somewhat energy inefficient building at this point, with few improvements to date. So we're thinking a building that looks maybe something like this, just kind of a typical square box brownstone building, or brick building, sorry. And so what are we seeking from our partner, and how are we supporting you? So, you know, most importantly, we seek partners who share our values, and who have an understanding and an eye for the broader vision of what we're trying to accomplish. As I mentioned, this is not about retrofitting one building. This is about really creating transformation in the market. And so we need a partner who is determined to help us start to catalyze that transformation in the market. And how we want to support you, and how we will support you, is you know, through this Department of Energy award, we are able to provide technical support for the design, to be heavily involved in the install process, and then to also conduct monitoring and ensure that the building is performing. We will work very closely with cities, states, and utilities for your area, and as well as philanthropic organizations, in order to secure any necessary gap financing that will be required for these kind of initial prototype projects. And then in tandem, we are working with manufacturers and suppliers to start to help them think through and prepare for creating these more integrated products for the market. So a few questions that we've heard to date in our conversations with you all are, how much will this cost? And we are very hesitant to start throwing cost numbers around. We are doing some initial analysis of cost, but this is something that you know, we really would like to have a specific building in hand, have an understanding of the capital improvement costs that are already being considered, and then how we basically can integrate what we're trying to do with that. And so that's really going to change the story on cost, depending on what that looks like. Are we able to pay for capital costs? Through this Department of Energy award, we are unable to pay for capital costs. But as I mentioned, we have already started initiating conversations with various state and local governments, as well as utilities and philanthropic organizations, to start identifying gap funding. If your building is selected, does this commit you to implementing a solution sight unseen? It does not. As I stated previously, we will be working hand in hand with a building owner to develop the design solution. And then you do ultimately have the option to pull the trigger or not pull the trigger. So even if your building is selected, you have an out. Obviously, we're very hopeful that isn't kind of, you know, that you will be very seriously considering implementing the solution, as that would be a huge risk for us on the project. Does the building owner have a say over the design? Yes. How rigid are the pilot building typology requirements? There's, I think, a lot of room for discussion here, and we recognize that, you know, each building will be unique, and so we need to create this kind of more mass customizable approach to doing this. And so we encourage you to enter information about your building into our eligibility form, even if you think there are a few things that are unique about your building that you want to see if they would work. So yes, we have flexibility there. Will a performance guarantee be included in the pilot? At the moment, that is not in the scope of the pilot, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities as we start to work through the solution. And it's something that we are very focused on developing for the larger Realize initiative, and we could consider incorporating in this project. So in terms of the process and the timeline, as I mentioned, we'll start with a building eligibility form, and that is live now on our website. So that's www.rmi.org/realize. And you can scroll down to the RFP section and you'll see one for developers and building owners. So you can enter information about up to 3 buildings in that intake form. We will be reviewing those, and by the 3rd of September, we will start emailing folks whose buildings were eligible with a full application. You'll have a couple of weeks to complete that building application. Those will be due in the middle of September on the 14th. And then we will, as we go through those applications, start reaching out to the most appropriate candidates and start requesting a little bit more detailed type of documentation on the building. And we'll begin reaching out and conducting interviews with the building owners and their teams. And the idea behind this process is to make this as, we don't want this to be incredibly cumbersome for you to see if your building is appropriate. And so we've tried to phase this so that it's only kind of the most, the final candidates that are pulling up more detailed documentation like floor plans and energy audits and things like that that you might already have on the building. So the interview and document submission period will end on October 12th. And the site visit period will then begin. We'll probably be doing 2 to 4 site visits for those kind of last few finalists. That will end on the 2nd of November, and then we will announce our final selection of the building on the 12th of November. And sorry, one thing to just mention about the eligibility forms is we've designed this so that it really shouldn't take you more than 5 to 10 minutes to complete per building to complete a form. So we just want you to really consider filling out this form regardless of even just the pilot. We're trying to collect as much information on the building stock, and as I said, to start this demand aggregation process that we think every single one of you can be a part of, and we can as a united front start to really influence the supply chain by having more information about your buildings and your interest in this program. So please do consider filling out the eligibility form, even if you don't have a building that you think is appropriate or are not able to participate in this specific pilot. Okay, well that concludes my part of the presentation. I would like to open it up for any questions that folks may have, and also if any of our team members have anything that they'd like to add. Okay, first question. Have you spoken with, or are you partnering with any financiers who are open to underwriting future energy savings? Do you anticipate this lender buy-in to net zero energy catching on? So yes, we are speaking with financiers. We have both Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are aware of what we're doing. We have also been trying to more directly target local CDFIs or kind of more progressive underwriters, like in New York, for example, the Community Preservation Corporation is a lender that we've been working with. And then Citibank is also involved in these discussions. So we're starting this work. I can't say that we have everything figured out and we have a streamlined package ready for you. One of the things that has been discussed is a certification, and how a certification for this type of project could be recognized by Fannie and Freddie for their green mortgage programs, where they underwrite up to, I believe, 75% of energy savings. So it's not 100% of energy savings, but it's a step very much in the right direction, and a conversation that we will continue to have with financiers. So the markets for the pilot are predominantly, I would say, the Northeast and Midwest, but we're also looking at, you know, like Delaware and Maryland, which aren't in the Northeast. So it's kind of the Midwest through the Eastern United States, but not down into the deep South, where that's a much more humid climate.
Yeah, in general, we're targeting metropolitan areas in ASHRAE climate zones 4 and 5, which I think expands from, you know, around DC and Delaware up to, you know, Vermont and Massachusetts and Chicago, Illinois area. So.
Okay, so this performance-based contracting piece of it. So as I mentioned, this is something, again, that's a longer-term program element. And we've been starting to research how this is structured in Europe. And their time horizon is much, much longer than ours in terms of their financing horizon. So I think they have like 30 to 40 year mortgages. And the performance guarantee is just really something that they have negotiated through these aggregated demand contracts. So it's just embedded into those aggregated demand contracts. And it's still kind of very much in its nascency. So this has been going on for about 5 years over there now. And it includes a regular kind of maintenance schedule and whatnot. And I believe there's some sort of fee associated with that. But we don't have all the specifics in terms of how that is playing out to date. But as I mentioned, in those large aggregated demand contracts are the elements of the requirements for the contractors, and the performance guarantee is with the contractor, and kind of their monitoring protocol for, complying with that performance. And then, like I said, there's this other piece of it, which is this energy plan for the tenants, and that kind of gives the tenants this energy budget, and is a contract in between the tenant and the building owner. And we have not been able to get our hands on that contract yet. It's something that we are awaiting to be translated from the Netherlands. So that's kind of the status of that. If there's anything more specific that you would like to know about that, please feel free to chat us, and we can, with your email, and we can kind of follow up with Energy Strong with those questions. So campus-style properties are definitely eligible, and if the buildings within that campus are very similar, that's fantastic, because it means, you know, what we're developing for this one building can be applicable to multiple buildings on that campus. And, you know, something that is not out of the realm of possibilities is if you have, we have to do a pilot that hits at least 30 units, but let's say that you had a campus you know, that had multiple buildings that made up those 30 units, that is an option. So yeah. So we have not looked at all of the variety of building code in our target geographies. We are hoping to, as we start to hone in on kind of a set of you know, final candidates for the building, to get a much clearer on the kind of code restrictions that might exist in that community before we make a final selection. But you know, for the most part, the big one is encroachment variances that will be needed if we have a really big and thick panel retrofit solution going to the exterior of the building that might be up against some sort of a property line. But again, we can get around that if it's a more standalone building that's set back. But again, that's something that is not out of the realm of possibilities if it is a little bit closer to the property line. Do these retrofits coincide with enterprise green communities requirements? I cannot say that I have deeply gone into, that we've been deeply researching enterprise green communities requirements. We are aware of them. I cannot speak at the moment to how they directly dovetail, but that is part of our research, as we're aware this is that program is very significant in the multifamily market. And I will follow up with you to find out. Thank you for your question. So this is a great question, and I might try to pass it along to Revision Architecture, who's our architecture partner. How do we think the design and construction process will take place? So we recognize that many of you already have you know, your own kind of design and engineering team, your own construction team that you like to work with. And so, you know, there is the option to have our firm as your architect of record, but we recognize that it's more likely that we will be kind of joining your existing team and integrating this solution into the plans that you have underway. And so they'll kind of be more of an advisor and help ensure that the design of this is incorporated into your overall capital improvement designs, and that they're also supporting the installation of these aspects of the project. So I think that answers that question, but if folks at Revision want to chime in, please feel free to chat me and I'll hand over the mic to you guys. Okay. I think those are all, oh, hold on one second. Yes, the eligible region can be anywhere from, you know, south of DC all the way up to Vermont, but we're also looking in the Midwest as well, all the way to, you know, Chicago. It's climate zone, ASHRAE climate zones 4 and 5 that we're considering. But, oh, and apologies, but not New York, because Retrofit New York is already doing 6 major design projects. So we want to try and make sure we're hitting other markets. We will only be doing. So the question was, how many pilot buildings are we doing? For this DOE award, we'll only be able to do 1 building, unless it is something like a campus style project where they're all the same, and our kind of you know, design and engineering and installation consultation can very easily transfer to those other buildings.
Yeah, so I think 1 30-minute building-ish, or 2 15, or, you know, 3 10 if they're all similar.
Okay, well, I think that we will circulate the webinar. We are recording the webinar, and we'll make that available to you all. And we're happy to share slides where folks want slides. Well, thank you everyone for your time. And we're very excited that you're engaged. And we, like I said, really are looking to build a community with you all that can help better meet your needs from the market around creating, high performance housing in your portfolios. And so we're just thrilled to be in touch. We're thrilled that you're interested in our work, and we hope to continue to collaborate with you down the road. So have a great day, and please don't hesitate to contact us with any questions. You can reach us at realize@rmi.org, and have a great day.